Relational Dialectics, Unit 5, Lesson 3. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conflict Resolution and Peacemaking, the class that teaches you how to manage interpersonal conflict and drama for yourself and others. I'm your instructor, David Lowry. Before we begin today's discussion, we want to remind you about the importance of paying attention to the life cycle of a conflict. Researchers describe conflicts as dances with predictable moves. The stages of a conflict include emergence, where people believe they are adversaries, escalation, where each side pursues incompatible goals, de-escalation, where the struggles become less severe, and finally, settlement, where participants negotiate new outcomes. Though we sequentially describe these stages, remember that people often jump back and forth between them. Knowing these stages can help a peacemaker understand what is about to happen in a conflict and what is needed to move successfully towards reconciliation. In our last podcast, we studied the paired bind. This is a conflict situation where each partner finds that each apparent alternative produces a no-win outcome. They are based on fundamental disagreements and differences which cannot be resolved in a way that is satisfactory to all by compromise. As we continue our study of no-win situations, we want to examine a third reason why people become overwhelmed by conflict. It is based on the notion that people expect rationality, consistency, and predictability in their dealings with others. When those views don't square with reality, people have no idea what to expect or what to do. Thus, today's podcast will examine the dialectical theory, which studies the role of contradiction and inconsistency in our relationships. Dialectical theory. As we note in our podcast on perceptions, people often impose an idea that we and others will share a similarity of beliefs, attitudes, and values, even though we were all trained differently by our parents' upbringing, culture, and the like. Perceptual expectations shape our way of living and our expectations and predictions of how others will behave. This, in turn, creates a false belief that people are logical and linear in their thoughts and behaviors, even as numerous interpersonal conflicts reveal a different truth. It would seem that people are more logically inconsistent than logical and linear. One of the significant inconsistencies of human behavior is the expectations that others will be consistent in their actions even when we are not. We often say one thing while doing another, never realizing the apparent contradiction of it all. Our claims of honesty, virtue, and high values often play out differently depending on our situation. To our way of thinking, however, there is a logic to our inconsistency. For instance, a parent may promise to give their child a certain amount of money every week, yet in practice, they withhold the money on weeks when funds are tight or when the child hasn't behaved as they should. Thus, children perceive this as a broken promise and a contradiction between what was said versus what was done. On the other hand, the parents view the withholding of allowance as a relevant exception. The consistency of inconsistencies. Since people are full of seemingly apparent contradictions and inconsistencies, peacemakers should understand this as much as possible. The study of dialectics provides helpful clues. A dialectic is a value or personal characteristic that ranges in value on a continuum, such as autonomy and connection. Some people describe them as the study of opposites, while others explain them in terms of polarities. Polarities readily describe many aspects of human behavior. Human skills and abilities range from novice to expert. Emotions run from happy to sad, mad to glad, positive to negative, and so on. Psychologists place mental skills such as intelligence on a bell curve ranging from low to high. These are only a few of humans' hundreds of polarities and dialectics. Instead of accepting and expecting these polarities, a temptation of people in conflict is to place the beliefs, attitudes, and values and behaviors of others in mutually exclusive categories. For instance, we may say, "You either support me or you don't." However, claims like these do not consider that our support for others varies and depends on many other situational variables. Sometimes we may fully support someone, other times our assistance is weaker. Push pull behaviors. Dialectics also describe behaviors that push and pull individuals in opposite directions, often simultaneously. For instance, one may be encouraged to go and drink with fellow employees after work. On the one hand, there is a need to engage and build relationships with others. However, there may be a competing need to create some personal space for quiet relaxation at the end of a tiring workday. It is possible to desire both friendly interactions and long for quiet simultaneously. Depending on personal circumstances, people choose whatever degree of belongingness seems appropriate. Even though one's behavior might appear inconsistent, there is a consistency of interaction if one considers the behavior as a dialectical dynamic of engagement and rest. Baxter and Montgomery's Relational Dialectics. Relational dialectics is the theory of interpersonal communication derived by communication scholars Leslie Baxter and Barbara Montgomery. It explores the interplay of tensions that exist in relationships using the explaining power of dialectics, the study of contradictions and opposing forces. According to West and Turner, four main concepts form the backdrop of relational dialectics. First, relationships are not linear. Two, relational life is characterized by change. Three, the contradiction is the fundamental fact of relational life. And four, communication is central to organizing and negotiating relational contradictions. The work of Baxter and Montgomery is important not only because of its explaining power for relationship couples, but for other types of tensions and conflicts between individuals and groups. Once one grasps the concept of dialectics, one may extend that thinking to different situations by creating new dialectics. The original relational dialectics model proposes 6 overall dialectics. So here are short definitions of each of the Baxter and Montgomery dialectics: autonomy and connectedness. This relational dynamic describes individuals' conflicting needs for personal time and space, as well as closeness and intimacy. People need time alone as well as times together. To express a need for seclusion does not mean that one doesn't value intimacy or connection. Both are necessary for a healthy relationship. Even in non couple relationships, this dynamic is in play. For instance, the workplace may have expectations of connectedness that differ from its employees. For example, management may believe that worker loyalty requires them to stay late and work on vital projects. In contrast, employees think they should be able to go home at the end of the day, even though much work is needed to complete the vital project. Favoritism and impartiality. To show favoritism is to indicate a preference for someone or something. In close personal relationships, it's desirable to reinforce the specialness of feelings for one another. However, depending on the situation, showing favoritism may be inappropriate. For instance, in a working relationship, there is an expectation that all will be treated fairly and impartially. Conflicts may occur when there is a misunderstanding of this dialectic. If a husband and wife work together in the same business, a spouse may expect favoritism while others expect impartiality. The favoritism and impartiality dialectic has explaining power apart from personal relationships. For instance, many conflicts evolve in the workplace as workers from one group or department believe that other groups are favored more than theirs. As another example, a person who asks to borrow money from their best friend might be surprised if their friend asks them to sign a loan agreement. Openness and closedness. People in relationships must learn to navigate the degree to which information may be shared without harming themselves and others. Openness is the willingness to share one's thoughts and feelings about people, places, and things. Sharing requires humility and vulnerability because one cannot always be sure of how others will react to what is shared. Closedness is a quality that limits one's sharing of thoughts and feelings. Openness is usually considered a helpful behavior that strengthens intimacy in close relationships. However, that is only sometimes the case. For example, someone might genuinely believe that sharing sensitive information might lead to a loss of intimacy or destroy the relationship. As another example, in the workplace, organizations may legitimately question the usefulness of transparency in decision making and the viability of the organization, and so on. Novelty and prediction. One of the reasons people enjoy relationships is the fact that each must continually negotiate what is acceptable. The ability to successfully predict our actions gives us an image of stability and reliability about what others believe we will think, say, and do. For instance, if a person is working late or meeting someone after work, many couples know that their partners will call to let them know what is happening. After hundreds of interactions and negotiations, people know what to expect from each other. Too much predictability, however, can lead to boredom. Therefore, relationships also need spontaneity and novelty, or the lack of an ability to predict. So, for instance, if someone asks you and your partner if you will join them for dinner, you might feel confident about accepting the invitation. Even so, checking in with your partner before deciding is better. Novelty also describes a willingness to set aside one's predictability and to do something out of character, such as buying a car unexpectedly or taking a vacation. The novelty dialectic impacts relational conflict differently since some people thrive on it more than others. Instrumentality and affection. This dynamic depends on whether affection is heartfelt, genuine, or contingent upon other factors such as looks, income, and so on. While it might seem as though affection should always trump instrumentality, there are many reasons why it does not and cannot. For example, sometimes a couple decides that it's in their best interest to wait until one or both have finished their schooling to get married. This doesn't mean that the couple has lost their deep affection. It just means there's a reality outside of the circumstances that can significantly impact their ability to move the relationship forward. This dynamic is also at play in other situations. For instance, a company might hire a new employee rather than give the job to a valued person of senior standing because the organization needs someone more qualified. Rightly or wrongly, it seems that relationships must always strike a balance between feelings of affection and goodwill and essential matters of the day, equality and inequality. Though it goes without saying, most relationships thrive under conditions of equality instead of classifications of inferiority or superiority. Even so, it's a fact that people bring superior strengths to relationships. These differences do not mean that one is better or worse than another. In some cases, these differences might be considered complementary. For instance, a shy partner might offset one who is outgoing. A partner with a big picture view of life and living might be married to someone who enjoys examining and handling details. The ability to see differences as complementary rather than competitive can be a healthy way of living in a relationship. At the same time, couples bring competitive skills and abilities to their relationship. For instance, one person might be a better financial manager or have greater emotional intelligence than the other. Again, the fact that we are not equally matched across all skills does not mean one person is better. It only means they are more accomplished in specific skills. In today's podcast, we continued our discussion of no win situations by explaining the concept of relational dialectics. We noted that individuals expect consistency in behavior when the best that most of us can do is align our behaviors along a dialectical continuum that feels consistent to us, but perhaps inconsistent to others. In our next lesson, we will offer some peacemaking principles based on our discussions of double and paired binds and relational dialectics. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to download a copy of the program's transcript so that you might better complete a short quiz over today's presentation.